Have you experienced a loss that's left you feeling lost and broken? Maybe you're wondering if you'll ever feel whole again. The truth is, healing is possible. Finding peace after loss is a journey, not a destination. Join me today as we explore practical strategies and insights to help you navigate your grief, rediscover hope, and ultimately find peace. If this resonates with you, be sure to check out our other episodes on Fading Memories for more support and guidance in your caregiving and healing journey. Welcome back, Fading Memories listeners. I always appreciate you giving us a little bit of time every week. This is an excellent episode for those of us that have been in this journey for a long time. Maybe we're getting close to the end. Maybe you're still hanging in there listening and your person is no longer with you. Today I'm talking to Carrie Lewis. She is a grief and support counselor, and I am going to let her introduce herself so you know that I don't butcher everything that she has to offer. We're going to be talking about how to recover from your caregiving journey after your person is gone. So thanks for joining me, Carrie.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate you having me on today and the opportunity to speak to your listeners. As you already have said, I'm a grief counselor. My goal is to try to get you through or help you through and support you through a loss. And it can be the death of a loved one. It can be a divorce or the end of a relationship. It can be a job loss or retirement. It could be anything, a loss of a pet, any kind of loss that it means something to you and has value to you is really what I deal with. And I actually started doing this because I lost my own husband 7.5 years ago. He was my best friend. He was everything. Fortunately, we had a wonderful marriage, and I lost him very unexpectedly and very suddenly. And so through my own grief journey and trying to, heal and move forward and just turn the page, I got my own counseling. And through that period, I kind of had it dawned on me. I thought, that this is something that I could do for others. I could help others because I know exactly what this is like, what loss is like in particular. And I really had a strong desire. It almost became like a calling to me to do this. So I took some training and I started my own practice, and here I am.
Caregiving does have kind of stages of loss. You got your anticipatory grief. Life happens while you're caregiving. My mom passed away, and then 6 months later, my oldest dog passed away. And then literally, I think it was 53 weeks after my mom died, my paternal grandmother died. So that was a real fun 53 weeks.
Yes.
But I know caring for my mom, every time she progressed in her disease, it felt like another loss. And anticipatory grief can be beneficial because you kind of work through a lot of those feelings that you get afterwards. But I don't know. I still think there's that typical morning afterwards. So how would you help somebody with dealing with that, like the loss of somebody that's still there?
Well, and that's a difficult one, but what I think one of the things that helps is remembering the things about the person that brought you joy, that things that you're grateful for that person. If it's in the case of your mom or any parent, obviously there's a lot of history there, and the best you can do is just appreciate whatever time you have left. The other thing is, and this is a hard thing for people, but I think it's important, is that they actually have discussions with the person that is going to pass and talk about their passing. And I think, in my experience at least, they actually appreciate talking about that because it somehow removes some of the fear. It's something that's inevitable. So they do want to talk about that. And I think it's important that you do that. And it's not easy, but I think it's an important thing. And of course, the other thing I think is terribly important is talking with someone like me, a counselor, someone you can trust. It might be a family member, it might be a good friend, but someone that you can trust and who isn't necessarily so biased so that you can deal with your own grief while you're going through all of that. And I think, after the person passes, you're going to be dealing with another kind of grief, but it's the best you can do, I think, to prepare yourself for the inevitable.
Would you talk to somebody with dementia about their impending death?
Well,
I was going to say doom, but that's a little dramatic.
Well, again, it depends on the person, of course. But I know in my limited experience with Alzheimer's patients, they often, especially toward the end, they are talking about times often when they were children or when, back in years before you ever even knew them. And so in that case, I don't think obviously can't discuss it, especially if they don't have many or any lucid moments. But just, going along with them and trying to make them as comfortable as possible about talking about their whatever it is. I know I had my neighbor who had Alzheimer's. She often talked about the fact that she was at the lake and she was getting ready to come home. And in her mind, that's where she grew up on a lake in Minnesota. And so that was very real to her. So rather than try to correct her or try to figure out what she was talking about, I just go along with it and talk with her. And until she reached a point where she literally was not lucid at all anymore and had to be put into a home. That's what I tried to do.
I'm trying to think with my mom. There were times, and this was always, it was like painfully funny, which is two different emotions, but she would
Right.
make comments about, my brain just doesn't work very well anymore. And at first, you kind of laugh it off because, oh, we all have those moments. But then it'd be like, does she know? Is she like locked in? You almost had to like set those aside. So I'm wondering if in those moments I could have said, well, that happens to all of us because technically it kind of does. If I had asked her, like, what do you want to have happen, or what do you think happens after we die? Kind of more
Right.
generic, and maybe in the way that you would talk to a younger child if like a grandparent or somebody dies.
Mm-hmm.
It might be worth trying.
Yes.
Once or twice. You'd obviously have to know your person well enough to know if you don't want to upset them.
Right.
That's totally the opposite.
Well,
You might actually get some insight, and maybe, I don't know, it might not hurt.
You might be surprised, and again, you made a point about the fact that you need to know the person, obviously, and know enough about them. But if they're suffering from Alzheimer's, for example, or any kind of dementia like that, there's a good chance that they really don't know what's going on. But I think that they do have moments where they do, and so I don't know. I feel like it's an important thing to discuss it if you can without getting the person upset or upsetting yourself too much for that matter. But, I just think that it's a good way to kind of break into what's going on in their head. And again, you might get some insights about that. And sometimes I know in my experience was this with my neighbor, she would say things that I wasn't always sure whether they were real or not. Well, I will find out later that, in talking to her daughter or other members of her family that, yeah, those were real things. And so, it's a difficult thing, particularly at the end of I know that last year that this lady's name was Mary, and that last year she was alive. It was tough because you never really knew. And she suffered from the paranoia where she would come to my house and she'd say that there were men inside of her house and they killed her husband, or they were, she had some really severe issues that way. But once again, I would just, try to remain as calm as I could. And I would say, let's go over and see what the men want. And of course, we'd go in and they were gone because they never were there in the first place. And so that was difficult. But I tried to go along with her as much as I possibly could because I knew that she didn't necessarily know what was going on. But we did talk about death a few times, and she was not fearful of it. I don't know that she even knew what it was sometimes, to be honest about it, but at least it was something that we could talk about, that I could understand and she could understand. And it's a difficult thing. And it's something you have to gauge as you're dealing with your person, whoever that is.
Yeah, almost kind of like in the same way you would gauge age appropriateness for whomever you're talking to.
Right.
So I lost my mom at the start of the pandemic. And then, like I said, 6 months later, the dog who loved me more than he loved himself, he got to 13. And then the nerve arthritis in his back legs just became too much for his body. And then, like my paternal grandmother, it was literally like 1 day shy of 53 weeks after my mom. So it was like bam, bam, bam.
I understand.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
And I felt so blessed at the start of the pandemic that my family was healthy and we were all safe and nobody lost jobs. And, there was so much confusion and scare and fear is a better term than scare and people losing loved ones. And so I was like, I did not feel like it was appropriate to be really outward about feeling bad about my mom. I mean, I did, but then I didn't because I know she never wanted to end up that way. My grandmother lived to 103. The dog lived past the dogs previous to him. So it was like, do I really have a lot to be unhappy about? But I think that while it was beneficial in some respects, I don't think it was super helpful because I'm not sure I processed things. Same thing kind of happened with my dad. I felt like I had about 48 hours to grieve and feel his loss. And then it had to go back to business as usual because my mom didn't remember what happened to him. There was stuff that had to happen with her and the estate and my dad. And oh my Lord, it was like, and I kind of resent that, but I don't know I mean, all that stuff had to happen. And, I still had to deal with his mother and my sister. It was like, well, deal with you people.
I understand that, and that's actually quite common, and particularly as you get older and your family's getting older, your friends are getting older. There's loss, of course, the pandemic that was no help, but I think it's vitally important that we each deal with grief in our own way. And one of those ways I think that's very important is to allow yourself to grieve, allow yourself to mourn. There's a slight difference between mourning and grieving, and mourning it generally comes in the early stages of your loss, whatever that is, and it's important to honor that because it's when you lose a person, someone that you love, that's a big deal, and you must release those feelings in order to begin the healing process. And it's the same thing when you try to just hold everything inside and, as the saying goes, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and keep on going. And many of us are like that. I'm one of those people. I've always kind of been that way until I lost my husband, and then that changed the whole game. But I think it's still important that you honor your loss, and you need to just allow yourself to grieve that loss and work through it. There are so many emotions. There's so many things that come up after you lose someone. We all have heard of the stages of grief. It's 5 stages or it's 4 stages, depending on what you read. That while there are stages within the grieving process, they don't always fall exactly as those stages outline that you do. The grieving process for everybody is different, and the length of that process is different. And you need to, I believe, not a lot of people will say, oh, you should be over that by now, or you shouldn't, it's been a month, or it's been whatever frame they feel is appropriate. And they kind of get after you for just continuing your grieving process. I highly recommend not paying any attention to those things. Just take care of yourself. If you need someone to talk to, again, there are plenty of resources out there that you can talk with someone. There's online resources. There are, counselors like myself. There are friends and family, things like that. Family's not always the best resource because they're more biased. They may be going through their own problems or so forth. But it's really vitally important that you talk to someone because the longer you don't, like in your case, you're talking about really just kind of sweeping under the rug and going on about your responsibilities, about your life, the things that you feel like are important for you to be doing. But by doing that, you're only prolonging your grief. And the other thing that can happen as a result of that is it can bring on other issues like depression and suicidal thoughts. There's all sorts of things that can happen because you're keeping all this inside and you're not releasing all that tension, all that stress. Most of us who have lost someone have a certain amount of fear and anxiety that goes along with that because you don't know how life is going to be after you've lost the person. Perhaps there's been no funeral arrangements or any other arrangements for that person. That causes a lot of anxiety and fear in you. And there's just a lot of emotions that are going on, and you need to deal with them with someone that you feel that you can trust, and that importantly, that won't judge you for however it is you're behaving, not give you a lot of advice. You don't need that. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're not any of those things. You're grieving. You've lost someone or something that you love. And so I feel very strongly about that. Of course, I think it's very important.
I don't disagree. I think I have the benefit of talking to people like you all the time, so maybe that helped me. But listening to you, I'm wondering if, because my dad was in the hospital for 32 days, and then he was home on hospice for a little over 2 months. So we had like 3.5-ish months of anticipation. I mean, we knew what was coming, so it wasn't a surprise. When the hospice people called me and said he'd passed, I slept so good that night, which kind of made me feel a little guilty, but I also knew that it was like my brain is not listening for the phone or whatever.
Right.
And that 48 hours, I basically said, I'm not making decisions. Like my husband, I had taken a shower. He came in, I was in the closet. I'm just staring at all my clothes. And he's like, he asked me a question. I'm like, I don't want to pick out like my favorite outfit because I don't want negative memories attached to something that I really like. I'm like, I just don't know what to wear. Mm-hmm. And I said, just find something that works. Mm-hmm. And he's like, okay. And he's like, are you hungry? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, what do you want to eat? I'm like, I don't know. Just make food. Like, I'm not making decisions. Done making decisions. And I didn't make decisions for 48 hours. It was great. Well, and then with my mom, the COVID protocols and, everything, it's like there was things I wanted to do. I wanted to have a dessert bar celebration of life. I knew her celebration of life would be dramatically smaller than my dad's, which was actually kind of beneficial. My dad's was almost overwhelming, but I couldn't do that. We've never done anything for my mom. I've done things for my mom. As a family, we have not done anything. And that pisses me off, to be like, why is it my responsibility to plan things? Like, she's got 3 siblings and another daughter. Why is it all on me? Just because her cremains are with me doesn't mean somebody can't say, hey, bring those here. We're going to have her interned with dad. My dad's at a military cemetery. Pretty much sure she doesn't want to be there. She might want to be with him. Military cemetery, not so much. Well, one of these days I will sprinkle her ashes because I'm pretty sure that's what she wanted. And the rest of the family can just, whatever. You're not going to talk to me about it, then I'm going to make the decision eventually. Right.
Well, and that's very common in families. And I know when my mother lived with me for 4 years before she died, and she was with me because nobody else would take her. And the option was for her to go into a home or live with me. Well, I didn't really want her to go into a home, so she lived with me. And the family members were critical of a lot of things I did. They didn't like this, they didn't like that. And my attitude about it was, well, guess what? If you don't like this, if you don't like the way I'm treating her, you don't like the way I'm handling her, then you take her. But, that wasn't what happened. And the same thing when she died, there was nobody there to help with the cost of the cremation or anything else except me. Nobody would take that responsibility. So I did. And because somebody had to do it, I couldn't just leave her in a freezer forever. That sounds gross, I know, but no, that was what I was faced with. So I literally had to take out a loan to have my mom cremated. The mortuary wouldn't cooperate in any way. It's like, well, you either pay or she stays in the freezer. And so there was that, and and these are hard things. And they make you mad, and sometimes they cause permanent rifts. As in my family, it was a permanent rift. We don't speak to each other at all anymore. But at the same time, I feel like, well, you know what? I did the very best I could for what I had to work with and what it had to be done. It had to be dealt with. And so you just do. And that's a hard thing. And again, this is where, finding support somewhere is helpful because you can release these feelings through your conversation without somebody judging you for it, without somebody blaming you for something or saying, well, you should have done this or you should have done that. No, that's not helpful at all. It really isn't. And and it needs to be someone that again, you can feel comfortable with and talk with. And I know that those things are terribly important. And a lot of people don't do that, particularly women and particularly people in our age group and above. I'm older than you, but it's common because we're so used to just handling things. But we need help sometimes, and it's important to deal with that. I know I dealt with my dad died first, and then a year later, my husband died, and then my mother died.
Oof.
And so that was and my ex-husband in the middle of all that, which I was still friendly with, and to some degree, uh, he died in the middle of all of that. So it's hard, it's difficult, but again, I think one of the things that helped me tremendously was having someone to talk to bounce things off of, to cry, not have somebody judge me or say, oh, well, you should have done this or should have done that. That was tremendously helpful to me. And even my own daughter, she's really one of the best people in the world because I can share my feelings with her. And she doesn't ever say, well, you should do this, Mom, or, well, this, she doesn't blame me. She doesn't make me feel guilty in any way. This Christmas, in fact, I've had a very hard time. And she said, if you don't feel like putting up your Christmas tree, Mom, don't. Just, you can come here and we'll share things together. And it's extremely helpful. It really is. So.
You have any advice? Because caregiving is a really great way to divide up families.
Oh, yeah.
It's happened, I think, well, it's happened on both sides of the family, but definitely my mom's side of the family, very estranged from them. They believe things about me that are 100% not true. Uh-huh. And it's like, I can't believe you believe this nonsense when I've demonstrated that I'm not a monster.
Right.
And I think caring for my grandmother, and then there was my mom. I think the whole family just got so burned out that like they kind of go inward, and then they're not being logical. I hope that makes sense.
It does.
Without getting into details about my crazy family.
Well,
I know that's one of the challenges. You lose somebody as a caregiver. Many people, that is their whole life, is caring for your mother or your spouse, your parent or your spouse. And then they pass away and the family's kind of adrift and your friends are kind of adrift and you're adrift. So how would you, I've tried to talk to some people I know about the whole family estrangement thing. And because they're close with their families, they're useless. I haven't found anybody that's in my boat that understands, that can listen and say, and offer some advice. So how would you help a caregiver work through that kind of scenario? Not just me, because I know a lot of people are in a similar cruise ship of this estrangement with me.
Exactly. Well, first of all, the first thing I think that's important for the caregiver themselves to remember is what they actually sacrificed, and sacrifice they do. So keep that in mind, and try to be as kind as you can to yourself that way. Give yourself credit for what you've done for that person. And families, again, everybody's got their own belief about certain things, but if they're not the one doing the caregiving, then they really don't know what you're going through. So the best thing to do is to try to remember that. They may be feeling their own grief in the sense that they feel guilty for not taking some responsibility for the care of that person. or for just moving on with their lives. I mean, that can't feel particularly good to them. So all you can try to do, honestly, is, forgive them and move on. Doesn't mean you have to forget, but try to forgive them for their shortcomings, because that's what they are. And again, keeping in mind that you've done a tremendous amount of sacrificing and help for that person that nobody else was willing to do. And there's nothing wrong with praising yourself for that and remembering it. And also, just like I said earlier, being grateful for the things that you do have left, for whatever life is left of that person, or after they pass, the things that, are fond memories to you, things, loving memories. Remember those things if you can. And, when the feelings of guilt come up, it's remind yourself that's not deserved. And chances are very good that they're not deserved, that you did a lot for the person in whatever time frame it is that you had to deal with that.
That makes sense. So what you were talking, you've got a book that you wrote. I think I titled this episode the same as your book.
Yeah.
And
Find peace.
Yeah, finding peace after loss.
In the midst of grief.
Okay. I shortened it. Podcast titles can't be longer than 65 characters.
It's fine. And that's, you made your point. Yes, it's just a guidebook, and it's primarily for people who are in the early stages of grief, because when you're going, there's a lot of shock, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of, anger, there's fear, anxiety that you go through. And it's really easy to get lost in all of that. I know for myself, for example, when my husband passed, I couldn't, I was in shock because it was so sudden and unexpected. That was one thing. But I literally could not hardly function. But I learned through that process that the simplest things, like getting up in the morning, getting out of bed every day, if that's all you do, that's a really good thing. So I wrote this little guidebook to give you some examples of things that I know are important for you to do. They're not hard to do. And they remind you to really take care of yourself. And that's really one of the most important things, and especially in the early stages. It's important all the time, but certainly in the early stages of grief, it's important for you to remember these basic things. And so it's on my website. And like I said, it's called Finding Peace in the Midst of Grief. And it's just a little guidebook. And so if you just give me your name and email address, you can download it. You can print it. You can do whatever you want with it. And there's no cost. And I just want people to have something that can help them through those stages, those early stages.
Even with, we were expecting my father to pass. I mean, he was on hospice for, goodness sake. And then obviously my mom felt a little bit more surprising because she fell and broke her leg. And then, that was the last straw for her body. Because prior to that, other than her brain, she's pretty healthy, which was saying a lot. And she was only, she had just turned 77 like 2.5 months earlier. So she was not very old. So yeah, that felt more sudden, but it also kind of it was definitely a relief because we missed the really, really, really tough end stage. She was getting close. And then she decided that was enough for her. She was out. I think I've said this before. I'm pretty sure she had a moment of clarity and realized, there was this virus thing happening. People couldn't come visit. She couldn't go watch kids, which is what she and I did. And the cost for her care was going up exponentially. And she just said, that's it. I'm out. And, she passed away on March 31st, 2020.
And, I know that it's a hard thing to look at it this way, but that is a blessing, because she was able to find a way to exit this earth on her own terms. And that is a blessing, because as you well know, the end stages of Alzheimer's are very unpleasant, and it's a very hard period for anyone to go through. I don't know how hard it is for the Alzheimer's patient. I truly don't know, but I'm guessing.
Hopefully, we won't find out.
Well, I'm not firsthand, at least, absolutely not. But I'm guessing that it's not so easy. It's because, as I mentioned, my neighbor Marion, she was terribly paranoid, and it was genuine fear when she would come to my house. She'd walk over in her underwear, she was so far out of it. And, um, she was genuinely fearful, and that fear only got worse. In fact, it ended up costing her her life, but she, that's a hard thing to go through. But when you are anticipating the death of someone like your dad or even your mom, um, all you can do at that point is be very grateful for whatever life they had, whatever they gave you, whatever memories you have. There's lots of, in all of that, there's always a lot of good memories. And if you can do your best to focus on those things, if you have a journal, for example, you can write in your journal about that. If you have things that you are really angry about, possibly with family or maybe the medical care the person's receiving you didn't feel was adequate enough, or any of those things, write them down on a piece of paper, write them in a journal, tear that page out and throw it in the trash or put it in the fireplace. And amazingly, those things, they sound kind of crazy, but they actually do help. They help move you out of those negative spaces into more positive spaces.
I'm
And
going to have to try that because I have the tendency to have negative thoughts just run through my head. And it's like, oh, stop it. So maybe instead of telling it, I should just, since we're using our wood burning stove to heat our house right now, I have plenty of options to burn a lot of stuff.
yeah, and you don't even, write it down. You don't have to read it. Just crumple it up and throw it in the fire or throw it in the trash. And it's amazing how it gets to a point where you do it. It's like it's done, and I can move forward now. I can, I can forget about it or whatever. And I also think it's important for us, all of us, especially right now, where we're living in some really crazy times right now, to stay away from a lot of the bad news. If you're a news junkie, turn it off. You don't need to hear all that. We hear about these shootings and all these crazy things that happen in places that's not really part of our lives. They're human beings, and you can sympathize and you can feel badly for a minute or two, but it's not a good idea to get buried in all of that and start thinking about that all the time, because all it does is bring more negative thoughts. And I think most human beings, you said you have a tendency, I think most people, human beings, I think, are wired for more negative thoughts than they are for positive thoughts. So therefore you have to work a little harder to get the positive stuff. But don't.
I had to curate so I get my news through the Apple News app, and I had to like unfollow publications because sometimes I'd get, like we had a recent school shooting, which that's a whole other podcast show. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, this is horrible. And I didn't read it. I just read the push notification, yeah. But I would get them like 6 or 7 times. Now it's like I don't get too many things that many times because I fixed it. And there are days when I think, is there like nothing happening in the news? Because I've gotten like, HGTV's holiday, the White House's holiday decorations, and how to handle, dry winter skin, like all the like fluffy, like women's magazine stuff.
Yeah.
Air quotes on that one. And it's like so much better to read, sometimes it's like those funny listicles where it's like, you're old if you recognize all these, or you can answer all these questions. I'm like, well, let's see if I'm old today.
Yeah.
It's so much better. And then like this morning, I thought I had a little time and I'm like, I should read a chapter in my book. And then I realized I might not have that much time. But, if I'd gotten up a little earlier, maybe I would have had enough time. So I'm reprogramming what I read on a daily basis.
And, we're all doing the very best we can. And we all have compassion for other human beings, as well we should. But once again, there are things that happen in this world we have absolutely no control over. We tend to worry about things that we have no control over, and in most cases never even happen anyway. And we need to not go there if we possibly can. It doesn't mean that you don't care, but there's nothing you can do about a school shooting or whatever it might be. I mean, there are just so many things, and there's just nothing we can do about it. And so if you're a person who says prayer, say a prayer for that family or that situation, whatever it might be, and then move on. And again, kind of pat yourself on the back for being a caring person. There's nothing wrong with that either. But there's, again, it's not helpful to anybody, especially to you, to get all involved in all of these things that go on, because you still have to function every day. You still have to go through your life and do what you have to do. And you have, you're in your case, you're doing a wonderful thing with your Fading Memories podcast and the work you do with the Alzheimer's Association. Those are important things, and you have to be able to keep doing those things if you want to help others. So you need to help yourself first. Women in particular have a tendency not to put themselves first. Everybody else goes first, but you can't take care of anybody if you don't put yourself first and take care of yourself. And that's just a fact of life. And I don't believe for 1 minute that when you grieve for someone or you feel badly for someone, that's a weakness by any stretch of the imagination. Quite the opposite, in fact. And
I can see that.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And again, taking care of yourself and doing whatever it takes. Stay away from consuming anything that's going to make you feel bad all the time. There's enough triggers.
Yeah.
With grief as it is. I mean, and many of them are not expected at all. It's just, you go someplace and something, you don't even always know what it is, but something will trigger that grief and you feel bad. Well, you can deal with that. You can get through it, but to add to it with pile all this other stuff on that's going on around you that you have no control over, that's not healthy. It's not healthy at all.
I think the internet makes it easy to feel like we need to be solving all of these problems.
Right.
And I have to remind myself regularly, I'm doing a lot just helping caregivers and helping people age well. And all of my passion goes towards, I mean, it's without tooting my own horn. It is important. We want to age well. We don't want to end up with some form of dementia. If we're caring for somebody that has it, we want to do the best job we can. Supporting all those people is a lot. So I can't solve school shootings or all the 500 other things that seem to happen every day. Right. And it is better to just tune out a lot of it. Like, be aware. Okay, yep, this dang it happened again.
Yeah.
If it was a school shooting in my community, then I'd probably get involved in something. I don't know what I would do, but I would be there somehow. But I try to focus on, especially on my social media. Like, one of my favorite new accounts is Bike Bus, is a physical education teacher that has gotten kids on bikes, riding bikes to school. The community that they've built and the joy that they've built and all the physical and mental benefits of these kids riding their bicycles to school. And it's growing. He was actually invited to the White House for something. And it's amazing how these little videos of these kids riding bikes to school, like, you'll read in the comments how many people get choked up. And I'm like, okay, I'm glad I'm not the only crazy person.
It's not crazy to have compassion and love for fellow human beings. It is. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if there were more of that in the world, we'd be a lot better off.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it's important to recognize that and not be ashamed of it. It's nothing wrong with loving another human being, even if you don't know them. It's very important. The other thing that I want to say, Jennifer, is that when you live your life that way and you're doing the best you can, whatever that is, then you're setting a good example for others to follow. And it's not your words, it's what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. People see that you're involved in causes and in things that are important to you, and you're doing what you can. You're only one woman. You can only do so much. But again, people see that, and that sets a great example for others. And they see that, well, if she can do it, I could probably do that too. And I think that's, again, another very important aspect of grieving and loss.
So if they're still listening, they've maybe recently lost their loved one, what few tips would you give them to kind of get over the hardest part? Not quicker, but just navigate through those first few months when it seems like everything smacks you upside the head and reminds you that this person is no longer with me.
That's right. Well, the first and foremost thing is take care of yourself as much as you possibly can. If you're feeling guilt, this is one of the things that I find is a common emotion after someone dies. But you, you have no reason to feel guilty. The truth is, most people don't. And if you do, then forgive yourself for that, because again, you're only human. All of us are doing the best we can, and in the case of a sudden death, and it's you have to deal with the shock. You have to deal with the most basic things, like dealing with the finances and dealing with the celebration of life or the memorial service or whatever, funeral, whatever it is you're having. Get yourself involved in those things. Um, just it's like I said, taking care of yourself, getting enough sleep, getting enough rest. And that's a very difficult thing to do in the early stages, but do the best you can. There's a lot of apps out there that you can download to your phone or your computer that sound like rain or wind or whatever it is that you like, running water, that kind of thing.
Not running water.
Well, whatever it is. I mean,
That'll make me get up 20 times to go pee.
Yeah, I understand. And they don't always work. I had that problem. I couldn't sleep. I just could not, but I did the very best I could. And
One thing people could look up, and I cannot remember what it actually stands for, but it's ASMR. So it's the sounds of certain things. I like to make handmade greeting cards, and there's actually a creator. He's on most of the platforms, but he has a YouTube video that I believe is titled something like "Just a Guy crafting you to sleep" or something like that. And it's like at least an hour of just, I haven't listened to it. I probably should try it, of just crafting the sounds of producing these handmade cards. And he blew up crazy, like on Instagram, just with the sounds and the demonstrations. Just like, it's a whole thing. The name of he's Ralph Tyndall, Tyndall. I'm sure you could find it, but if you look up ASMR, crafting might not be your thing. Maybe cooking is, or
yeah.
I don't know. I know it's a really soothing. ASMR's got like serious soothing benefits. You just have to find the sounds that work for you. Not running water.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, everybody has something different that they like. They sound like the sound of beach waves, perhaps, or like I said, rainfall on the roof, or there's a lot of
like nature sounds.
yes,
Birds chirping, and
yeah, and there are a
that's
lot
the
of
one I listen to.
well, and a lot of these apps you can kind of mix sounds. For instance, if you like the sound of rainfall and you like the sound of birds, you can actually set them up so that both of those play together, so it creates its own sound. And for some that works, for some it doesn't. It didn't work well for me, but I kept trying because I couldn't sleep, and I needed, I just needed some help. Having a pet nearby, we had a dog when my husband died, and I still have her, as a matter of fact, and that was very comforting to me because she was grieving as well. It took, animals don't grieve in the same way we do, nor for the length of time we do, but they do have their own grief period, and having kind of helping each other. It sounds kind of crazy, but it really does help a lot. It works. And again, just if you need to watch a movie, pick something that's very lighthearted, that makes you feel good, that's not going to remind you of what you've just been through. Like I said, getting out in nature, just taking a walk in nature. Just if you can't do that, get out in your own backyard or something like that. Just eating properly, drinking enough water, all of those things are all very, very important for you to take. And it all relates back to taking care of yourself. That's really what we're talking about. And I can remember one of the things that I struggled with. My husband was kind of a clown. He was a funny guy. He liked making people laugh and kind of entertaining for people. And one evening, I think it was maybe a couple of months after he passed, and his stepson and girlfriend and I were all reminiscing and talking about some of the funny things he did. And I found myself actually laughing, and then immediately catching myself and saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't do that. Bobby's gone. I can't have that." And I realized later, as I thought about that, that actually was a very good thing for me. It was a release of tension and a release of grief. And that's what he would want of me. If he were there standing in the room, he would say, I want you to have a good life. I don't want you to be sad the rest of your life. And there's no point in that. You know, one of the hardest things when someone dies is accepting that they are not only gone, but they're never coming back. That's a tough thing, but you have to do that. And in time, if you think about it that way, it actually helps relieve some of the grief, and it helps a lot. And you're going to miss the person. You're going to long to see that person. But if you think of it in the sense that that person lives on in your heart, someone you love, that person lives in your heart and they live in your memory. So they aren't gone really. They are still there in your heart and they're in your mind and in your memories. And I think it certainly was helpful for me, and it's helpful for a lot of people that I speak with to remember that. So, and sometimes, depending on your belief system, sometimes there's little hints that they let you know physically that they're still around. And if you're fortunate enough to have that, then again, embrace it and be grateful for that. Dreams is another way people show up after they've passed. There are a variety of reasons, and or a variety of things, I should say. And so all of those things, come down to just taking care of yourself. Don't beat yourself up for something. If you feel guilt, ask yourself, what am I feeling guilty about really? There's probably nothing.
You can't change it anyway, so.
You can't change it anyway. I think that's really a big thing to remember. You cannot change it, but you can forgive yourself. And if you're mad at the person that passed, you can forgive them too. Maybe like you mentioned with your mom, when she was ready to go, she found a way to go. And I think that probably happens a lot more than we even realize, but it's up to them.
I think that's maybe why it was easier. Not easier. I mean, neither one of my parents was easy, but it didn't seem, I don't know, my grief with both of them seemed abbreviated. And I think that's because it was expected. Again, my mom's was a little bit sudden, but once you knew it was imminent, it was like, oh, okay. I mean, I had, what was it, about 36 hours I hadn't seen her for 2 weeks because of the lockdowns. And when I went in to see her and I saw her, I was like, oh yeah, this is not ending how I expected. So it was not a shock like you experienced, which I think helped a lot. And I didn't have anything else to do other than continue the podcast because it was COVID. There was nothing else to do. It was podcast and make handmade cards and read books. That was pretty much 2 years of my life.
Well, and that's okay because you were doing the best you could. You're taking care of yourself. And there is, what else can you do? When someone passes, there's nothing you can do about it. We want to, but we can't. And so again, it comes down to taking care of ourselves and reminding ourselves of the good things that we did and not get caught up in guilt and all of that. There are reasons why things happen the way they do, and we can't get caught up.
Sounds like my mom.
Oh, it's true.
She used to say that everything happens for a reason. Your house might blow down. Everything happens for a reason. Like what, lady? How? Why?
Well, and I don't mean to say that I think there's some grand plan in writing someplace that I don't mean that at all, but things do happen for reasons. I know for myself, I've come to believe that there are many, many things that happen in this universe and that we don't, as human beings, we don't really understand them at all, but they happen because there are so many things that happen that there doesn't seem to be an explanation for it. Like someone dying suddenly. Why did that happen? My husband was only 66 years old when he died. And why? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know where he is in terms of what he looks like or any of those things. But I feel like those are things that as human beings, we're not necessarily meant to know those things. I think we'll know someday, but we're not. And that, for me at least, and others that I know, it's helpful to believe that way because, again, we can't control everything like we think we can. We have very little control over things. And so I think that's important to recognize that again, we can't change things and we probably shouldn't.
That sounds like a great place to end. Leave them with some thoughts to chew on because we already know we could go all day.
Yes, we we could. And I love that. I really do. I appreciate that about you, Jennifer. You're very open, and I love having good conversation like that with you.
Thank you. So the Carrie's book is linked on my website to hers. She said it was a free download. Just have to give her your email. And I trust her. She's not going to spam you. So it's definitely too much work.
Oh no, I'm not. No, I'm not about that at all. I just want to give something to someone that can use it, or maybe it might not be them personally, but maybe someone they know, and maybe that would be helpful as well. And I would like to mention one last thing before we end this is that I am going to be one of the many authors in a book that's coming out in March called Divine Rebirth, and it'll mostly be about my own story and so forth. But if anybody wants to get to know who I am a little bit better, that would be a way to do that. And of course, I have my website, which is secondactmastery.com. And they can learn something about me and what I do there as well.
And all that's linked in the show notes. So when the book comes out, let me know. I'll make sure that's linked in the show notes so they can look that up too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Jennifer. Thank you. And I appreciate those that stood by and listened this whole time. And I wish everybody the best. Happy holidays.